With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today. Simply go to tntradio.live. Patrick Henningsen talks on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TNT, today's News Talk. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Thank you for joining us here on Wednesday. It's great to have you with us. We have a very, very powerful broadcast for you today. Very pleased and privileged to welcome in the second hour a very special guest, Israeli-American activist, peace advocate, Miko Peled is going to join us in the second hour. That's going to be a very important conversation. We're going to be talking about, obviously, what's happening in Gaza right now and the future of Palestine, the future of the clash between the Israeli state and the native Palestinian population. We're going to talk about that with, I think, one of the most prominent voices in recent years, Miko Peled, fantastic author, speaker. We're pleased to have him on the show. We'll be connecting him in the second hour. He's also on Piers Morgan at the moment as we speak. So we'll be able to get live reactions from Miko about what it was like to be in the hot seat there with Piers Morgan. So that's going to be kind of an interesting one. Interesting dynamic there as well. So, but also in the first hour, we're going to be joined by Freddie Ponton. We've got him on just off stage at the moment. We will cut to Freddie for maybe a comment on this breaking story, but I want to get into the top sort of global news story right now, and that's there is a downed plane, and this isn't just any downed plane; it's a downed Russian plane. Interesting. In the region of Belgorod, right on the Ukrainian-Russian border. As you know, Ukraine has launched all sorts of attacks hitting civilians in Belgorod. Russia is calling these terrorist attacks by Kiev. Certainly, they're desperate, to say the least. But anyway, what's happened here, a Russian plane carrying Ukrainian POWs. Ukrainian POWs on a Russian plane has been shot down, according to the Russian MOD on this. They're claiming that the Ukrainians, the regime in Kiev, has shot down this Russian plane carrying Ukrainian prisoners of war, crashed on Wednesday. That'll be this morning, Moscow time, killing everybody on board, including the pilots. And they believe that Kiev, the Zelensky regime, I use the term regime because they seem to have earned it with the state of society right now in Ukraine, completely suspending freedom of speech, elections, democracy, freedom of religion, and all that's been suspended. So we will call it a regime, just a caveat there. Russia is saying they did this intentionally in order to pin an attack on Moscow and to inflame the situation between the two countries. And the defense ministry as well in Moscow says that Kiev has once again shown its true colors. There are also those that believe, I tend to veer towards this explanation, that there were people on board that plane that the Ukrainian government wanted dead. Because this is not a coincidence that this has happened. So is it a case that they don't want these prisoners of war to be speaking in public, or do they have some information, some intelligence that Kiev would want to suppress and would be inconvenient for a really desperate Zelensky regime at the moment? And I think NATO is pretty desperate. So is Zelensky. So this is an interesting breaking story here. They're calling it an act of terrorism. It is disturbing because, you know, just as well, this could have been a passenger airliner. But isn't this interesting? Ukraine shooting down a plane and blaming it on Russia. And I brought up this possibility, as did many others, back in July 2014 with the downing of flight MH17, Malaysia Airlines. And many of us at the time and continue to be derided as conspiracy theorists for even suggesting such a thing. How dare we go against the online virtual findings of Bellingcat, for instance? How dare we go against the mainstream media and the whole machine? I even got attacked by a CNN anchor on Twitter for this very story. He called me an MH17 conspiracy theorist. But looking at this story here, you can see it's pretty plausible, in fact, that this is the case. So more details are going to come out on this, but it looks like anti-aircraft missiles, Ukrainian air defenses were stationed in the Kharkiv region, and looks like 2 missiles were launched, according to the Russian MOD. So this is interesting. It opens up a lot of problems as well in terms of the safety of air travel within Russian airspace. And more than likely, this is going to trigger a massive retaliation by the Russian Federation, by their MOD, against military targets in Ukraine. That goes without a doubt. Every single time we've seen this pattern, there have been these attacks, be they asymmetric. Kerch Strait Bridge, for instance, the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol and Crimea, anytime these were attacked, or Russian naval assets, or other attacks in Belgrade, there's been a retaliation by the Russian Federation, and it's been swift and it's been hard. And I think you're probably going to see that here. There have been recent Russian moves to neutralize military targets, according to their press releases, in the Kharkiv region, and also in Odessa. These are 2 mainly Russian ethnic regions, and by language, ethnicity, identifying as Russian. So Kharkiv and Odessa. Many believe that in the coming months, we're going to see serious moves by the Russian Federation to perhaps what they would consider liberating these territories, as they have done in Kherson, Zaporizhia, and also the Donbass regions of Lugansk and Donetsk, which actually have been fairly autonomous since 2014 after the Maidan beer hall putsch. So that's the story, folks. And we'll be tracking this fairly closely. Actually, if we are able to, let's bring, we believe we have Freddie Ponton, our guest, who's just off stage. Let's bring him onto the call if we can, to comment on this. We'll also be breaking in a few minutes with the network and coming back. But yeah, if we do have Freddie, welcome to the program. Freddie Ponton, independent journalist and researcher, also contributor at 21stCenturyWire.com. Thanks for joining us, Freddie.
It's a pleasure. Good to be here, Patrick. Great to be. Great news. I mean, I was listening to this breaking news because it's really still developing. But indeed, it's very interesting to see how, depending on where you read the news, what kind of story you get. And so it seems to be the usual spin of the story. But what's really interesting, and that has not really been said, is that there was actually a second plane that was also aiding towards this prisoner exchange, because it was a prisoner exchange. And these prisoner exchanges have been taking place since the beginning of the conflict, so it's nothing new. What's interesting here is the use of commercial transport. So there's no kind of a military jet fighter flight, flying alongside the plane. This is purely a direct agreement at the highest level in order to exchange prisoners. So this should have gone really smoothly. The story on the Ukrainian side is not making a lot of sense, because they say they were worried that the Russian military were carrying S-300 missiles, which, unlikely will make it to a commercial airplane, and especially because the time, the dates, and the locations was agreed upon, and there was 2 exchanges that needed to take place, and that were agreed upon. So we know the second Russian Tu-76 transport turned back and then avoided, obviously, to be struck. But it's quite clear that this plane has been taken down. It's been taken down by the Ukrainians. What is the reason? What is the political gain, the military gain? I'm not quite sure about that, but clearly this is a bad news for future exchange. So it's not working for Ukraine, and clearly someone is trying to sabotage the idea of prisoner exchange at this stage. So it's developing, and we need obviously to get more intelligence to try to find out really what's going on here, because it's quite serious, and a lot of people are going to get upset. I mean, the list of those on board was already kind of issued on the Russian media, so they have the birth date and so on. So we know exactly who these people are. So I guess the family are not going to be too happy about that.
So Freddie, we can kind of rule out that this was not a coincidence. In other words, Both sides had knowledge of what was going on. So it's, to say this was a missed signal or some confusion, it's highly unlikely, isn't it?
It's unlikely, and already in the press you can read that the Russians have already kind of identified the manufacturers of these missiles, saying they come from US and Germany. So this is not, these are NATO weaponries provided to Ukraine. So whether it comes from NATO, I doubt it, NATO outside of Ukraine trying to do something so silly. So I think it's really inside the Ukrainian government. We know there's a lot of turmoil at the moment between the defense and Zaluzhny and all this, kind of a power struggle at the moment with the US and NATO, Europe trying to reinvigorate this war effort, because they just simply cannot accept the defeat, which is quite apparent to most of the military experts and those on the ground. So I think it's part of that struggle. I think it's something internal, from what I could say initially, but clearly not a mistake to sabotage at this stage.
Yeah, and Russia's accusing Ukraine of trying to stage a false flag attack, saying that, they quote, nevertheless, the Nazi Kiev regime carried out this attack in a bid to accuse Russia of killing members of the Ukrainian military. By committing this terrorist act, the Ukrainian leadership showed its true face, disregarding lives of its own citizens. So, like, maybe one of those outrageous stories that play in the West. The West love the incomparable, impossible story that doesn't make any sense, and then they would pin it on Putin, and they would say, well, of course Putin did this. It doesn't make sense, but he's a crazy dictator, and that's what crazy dictators do. They do crazy things. That's basically how it plays out in the world of CNN, the BBC, and so forth. So that's what they're saying, Freddie. So we will watch this and hopefully glean some more details from this. We're going to be covering more breaking news out of Ukraine with Freddie Ponton, our guest during this hour. In the meantime, we're going to break here with TNT, today's news talk, and when we come back, we're going to expose French mercenaries in Ukraine and in Gaza. What is France up to, and why are they playing such a big role in injecting some of these foreign fighters into these theaters of war? It's a scandal that's brewing in France right now. We'll talk about it with Freddie. All this and more on the other side. Stay right there.
TNT's Kate Shemirani.
I'm of the belief that your body can totally 100% heal itself if you remove the offending things and you flood your body with what it needs. What do your dogs and your kids do when they get sick? They lie down and sleep, don't they? They don't want to eat. They get great big temperatures and they just want to rest. What, do you think you're a special snowflake? You're any different? No, that's you as well. But what do they want to do when you go to the hospital? I've seen it firsthand in the last couple of weeks. They're just going to serve you rubbish food, wheat, sugar, dairy, animal protein, tea and coffee, chlorinated bromine water, drugs, pharmaceutical petroleum-based drugs.
Kate Shemirani on today's News Talk, TNT. Today's News Talk Radio.
Now we're talking.
TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. We're still in hour number one of this live broadcast. Patrick Henningsen, your host here. This is TNT, today's News Talk. And before the break, we're covering this incredible story out of the Ukraine with the downed Russian airliner carrying Ukrainian POWs. Very strange story. We got some great commentary, however, from Freddie Ponton on this. Thanks for the details. We'll bring Freddie back up onto the stage. Freddie is an independent journalist and researcher. He's also a contributor at 21stcenturywire.com. Check out his archive there at the website. Just type Freddie Ponton into the search bar. You'll see all of his articles and interviews. There's a lot to digest there. Freddie, welcome back to the program. Now, the story that I want to focus on during this hour is one that you've been looking into very closely. Obviously, this is an extreme area of interest for you, being from the part of the world that you're from. You're very concerned about your country's involvement in the Ukraine conflict. You have been from the beginning. You've been very outspoken and very critical of Emmanuel Macron, of France's role in NATO throughout the duration of this conflict. And recently, some very disturbing news has come to light. Just the scale of French fighters, French mercenaries in Ukraine. Some of them, unfortunately, met an untimely demise, it seems, last week. But also, they're also showing up in Israel, in Gaza, with the IDF's invasion, ground invasion into the Gaza Strip. Let's start with Ukraine. Tell us about what happened, because this is quite a serious story, Freddie. People are basically saying that a hotel was hit in a Russian missile strike. Contained quite a few French mercenaries. There's also reports of suffering large number of casualties in the field. Many are dying. And the government's kind of wanting to wash its hands of all this in France. There's more going on here, Freddie, but this has been going on for a while. Give us some insight on this latest breaking story, and let's put it into perspective. Freddie, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a developing story still, Patrick, but very interesting indeed. Last week, I think it's on the 16th of January, last Tuesday, we saw basically a hotel in Kharkiv, which is the northern eastern parts of Ukraine. And it seems that the Russians have conducted a very precision strike on a multi-store building in a residential area. So they were very precise about who they were looking for, who they were targeting. And very quickly on Wednesday, they declared that they've struck this building on the strength that they were harboring mercenaries from France and other countries, but mainly from France. From the report, we saw the Kiev government reporting that 2 Russian missiles struck actually the building in this residential area. Basically, the casualties were reported as 60 people killed and 17 people injured, with 2 people in bad condition in hospital at this moment in time. So, of course, when it first came out last week, we started to try to look into the information and intelligence that is already available, because this is something that the Russians have been looking at for a very long time. But not only the Russians, many investigative journalists have looked into the presence of mercenaries in Ukraine, not since the 2022, but actually since 2020, even earlier in 2018. So we can clearly see that there has been a concerted effort from NATO member states and NATO Supreme Allied Commands in Europe to in the eve of the conflict, at least 2 or 3 years ahead of that particular time, we saw that a lot of military intelligence activities was taking place in Ukraine, mainly in Kiev, in Kharkiv, and other areas, with the setting up of NATO command posts, which were undeclared, of course, at the time. So there was a lot of IRS going on, intelligence research and surveillance operation conducted, especially out of Kiev. And we saw, obviously, at the time, reports coming out of investigative journalists like Warren Thornton and others as well, reporting on the French intelligence and military intelligence being in Kiev, coordinating, meeting with mercenaries. These guys were spending literally months after months in Kiev, renting apartments, and all that has been very well documented. A lot of information came out of different embassies, including embassies in Poland, Germany, and Georgia, and Ukraine probably as well. So I believe a lot of people were able to already identify these connections in between military intelligence. For the French, that will be the DRM, le Département des Renseignements Militaires, which is the Directorate for Military Intelligence. This is directly attached to the Joint Chief of Staff at the highest level within the military. On the top, you have the Minister of Defense. And we know from people that look into NATO and understand the NATO construct that most of the Joint Chief of Staff military intelligence have a direct line with NATO Supreme Allied Commands in Europe. So it's quite fair to assume that prior to the war in Ukraine, NATO and its military forces in Germany, in France, in Italy, in the UK would have concerted and coordinated their efforts to make sure that they could bring to the ground ahead of the conflict the right set of skills, if you will. So from cyber warfare to people who really specialize in, for example, medical training, transportations for exfiltrations, because obviously nobody is supposed to be there, whether they're mercenaries, whether they're citizens, any French, any English, any British, any Italian or German, which is including in a military operation alongside the Ukraine armed forces shouldn't be there by law. And I think the Russian government has been very clear as far as how these people will be treated. And I think this is really an operation conducted by the Russian, which was available probably to them a long time ago, but it probably set on it, hoping that maybe this conflict will come to an end earlier and they wouldn't have to do that. But it seems that this conflict is dragging, and the rhetoric coming out of France is definitely displeasing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. And I think they wanted to send a very clear message that they were taking this extremely seriously, and that this French citizen, mercenary, volunteer, doesn't matter how you call it, from the moment they're involved in military operation, they are a legitimate target. And I think the Russia wanted to make a very serious point that they know what's going on in Kiev, they know what's going on in Kharkiv, and they've been keeping track of all this military intelligence operations.
And just to be clear, Freddie, mercenaries or, quote, volunteers, soldiers of fortune, they're not covered under the Geneva Convention. So, as you said, they're kind of fair game. They're not really protected by anything. They're not supposed to be there. Their presence is illegal as deemed by international law and conventions. But what we saw, it was interesting, Freddie. You remember back in the spring of 2022, in the early months of the Ukrainian conflict here, and there were reports of French Foreign Legion members, obviously not in Legionnaire uniforms, but going in under the guise or under the aegis of the Ukrainian volunteer army or whatever, and were exposed. The patches were shown as they evacuated some of their accommodations, as it were, in Mariupol, and then the Azovstal plant. Macron was freaking out. Do you remember that? He was saying, ready to make deals, wanting to send in helicopters. There were clearly French personnel, special forces or whatever, underneath Azovstal. And I think they managed to exfiltrate a few of those, but some helicopters were shot down trying to flee, Freddie. And there was never really any comment about who was on those helicopters. So this is interesting, Freddie. I mean, so this isn't a new issue at all. France seems to be deeply, deeply involved in this subterfuge from the beginning.
Yes, absolutely. As I say, every story, especially the one of the French mercenary being taken down in Kharkiv, needs to be brought into a context, and a wider context, a context of a NATO operation that has been taking place. At least the earliest we can find is 2018, but really we can see the accelerations in 2020 with a lot of military intelligence moving into Ukraine, directly managed with the defense attaché from the embassies, and they start to coordinate and making contact on the ground. So they're there to basically meet the intelligence community, but also meet the mercenary, the corporate side of it, or even the private military outfits out of Europe and other countries as well. So they're gathering intelligence, they're preparing themselves. So on one side, you get Merkel and Macron's, working on the Minsk agreement. On the other side, the decisions has already been made from NATO that this conflict is going to take place, and it's really about to bring the set of skills, the training, the intelligence, the cyber warfare capacities and capabilities, so that Ukraine can have all the chances on its side for this upcoming fight. So this provocation against the Russian is very kind of embedded in this understanding. And then if you take it from this point of view, then you can assess obviously the various way NATO would have operated. And what you're referring to is simply basically a NATO command post that was taken down. They don't have only one in Kiev. From the intel report that we can gather, we understand that there were multiple NATO command post in Ukraine. And this operation, which I believe took place around May the 9th in 2022, was basically involving a lot of these military intelligence people, US, French, UK, and those were basically hiding in the basements. And they were taken out. So I think Russia is extremely prepared, have a great, definitely best to none intelligence network and capability to get and to identify targets, legitimate targets as far as they're concerned. So NATO should not be there. Any French military, paramilitary, only citizens, representing their countries on the battlefield is a legitimate target. So in France, it's illegal. We're not allowed to go and fight as a French citizen for another countries or representing or being embedded in some another country's armed forces. It's absolutely illegal. This is actually a debate that was brought to the parliament in France last year, where parliamentaries were asking the government to start to look into these mercenaries or these former military or a Nazi group as well from France, heading towards Ukraine and being part of the joining the Azov and 93 battalions and so on. So that intelligence is available. It's been analyzed already, and it's quite clear. It's very hard for the French government to deny that because, of course, the social media is providing a lot of information, and many of these clans are basically not afraid to show themselves and on Telegram posts and so on, boasting about what they do or what they're about to do. But at the early part of the conflict, Patrick, it's important to understand that a lot of these fighters, some of them were killed on the ground and exfiltrated. But what you're seeing at the moment, really, these are real skilled soldiers or former soldiers or former foreign French legions, which have basically they are rotating in Ukraine to provide a set of skills, because some of the equipment that comes required, obviously, people that have experience on the ground to use these weapons and trains, obviously, various officers within the Ukraine armed forces. So this is very technical. This is very skills-based. And these are rarely people that go on the front line. They did in the first place, not anymore. I think these are people that are embedded in order to pass on the know-how and the knowledge, the skill, and then the skill set. So that's what we are saying. But really, I want to make the point, Patrick, that, as I said, this is part of a coordinated effort from NATO. It is a part of a coordinated effort from certain member states like France, like Germany and other countries, which basically have been back and forth in Kiev. We saw them. They were reported to be in Poland, even in Russia, in St. Petersburg. They were reported to be in Georgia, training some Georgian special forces and so on. So this has been an ongoing effort. So to deny that, because the French position, as you know, is pretty much a full denial about French presence alongside the Ukrainian armed forces. And that creates just unnecessary tensions. And I think that the Russian government did what they had to do to send a very strong message out there.
Yeah, and just to be clear, some of the weapons that France is providing to Ukraine, you've reported on this extensively, by the way, Freddie. You're one of the first people to really extensively expose the use of depleted uranium in some of the French weaponry that's been sent to Ukraine. But the French Mistral shoulder-based or ground-based portable missile system, and also the French can operate and do instruction on U.S. Javelin missiles as well, because France has procured a lot of these from the United States and then shipped them to Ukraine. So the French forces are well versed in the U.S. Javelin technology as well. So that's interesting. There's a lot of French weaponry that has been mixed in there among the deliveries over the last 2 years.
Well, we saw Macron's last speech with regards to sending more aid to Ukraine. Was very clear about the kind of equipments. And I only tell you half of the story. Of course, they're not going to tell you the whole story. But we know he's planning to send. So when he says planning, that's mean this kind of material has already reached Ukraine. They'll never tell you we're planning to do that. That's just not the way it works. When you announce it, that's meant it's already on the ground. So we know that about 40 Scalp long-range missiles have made it to Ukraine. He's talking about Caesar, heavy artillery, and he's talking about a lot of shells and a lot of bombs as well available. So that's going to be rotating on a monthly basis. But clearly, I think what we are seeing is UK and Germany and France and Italy is really kind of now going back at procuring more support so that Ukraine can achieve its goal. And one of the primary goals of the Ukrainian defense and the armed forces is to take control of the sky. So I think we're going to see a lot of kind of missiles and anything that is basically ground-air missile capabilities, to be able, as I said, to take on helicopters, planes, whatever comes out of the skies, drones, of course. And we're going to see an increase in that particular areas of defense. And then Macron's are also kind of already in the French press announced and really boasted about, the fact that our manufacturers or our defense contractors needed to scale up their manufacturing operation because he wants really more material to support this new wave of counterattack, I suppose, from Ukraine, because Ukraine has lost now again territories, and Ukraine is in kind of a defensive positions, but it's really not looking good. I mean, from a military analysis point of view, it looked like we're trying to save a war that has already been lost on the ground. So I don't know what they're going to come up with, but it's really not looking good. It looks, for me, from my own analysis, is looking like they are buying time. They are buying time because they want to drag on this conflict, more money to be poured into Ukraine. But from a military point of view, as I said it and in other interviews that I've given on RT recently, is that more we wait and more casualties is going to come, more people will die, more territories will be lost. And at the end of the day, this conflict will eventually end up at the negotiation table. But less territory, more people have died in between, and more importantly, you're going to have very little say in the negotiation table because it is the winner normally that kind of enforce the terms of the negotiations. So nothing is making sense what's coming out of Europe at the moment. They're acting like they are in charge and they can decide what's going to be the outcome of the war, when clearly this decision is no longer in their hand.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. They've shoved Ukraine into a NATO meat grinder. It doesn't look like there's any way out. Freddie, I want to also talk about the emergence of French mercenaries fighting for the IDF. Initial reports are in the early days that they were some of the first ones they sent in, and among the first casualties, which of course Israel doesn't declare because they weren't Israeli citizens, they were mercenaries, most of them French. And then we see viral videos recently of a crazy French soldier. Maybe he was a dual citizen, we don't know, but completely insane. So there is a major French contingent fighting in Gaza as well. How many of these are embedded special forces? How many of these are soldiers of fortune? And how many of these are dual Israeli citizens?
Well, I think this is mainly dual citizens. I doubt that just a normal French person in its right mind would want to be part of this conflict, even though they have political views or maybe even religious views that would support maybe a presence there. But again, you need people that have some kind of experience in Israeli equipment, people that have experience in military, people that have been fighting at least in previous war, like in Iraq or Afghanistan. So these are people that might have come out of, NATO operations. They no longer work for NATO, but they have dual citizenship with Israel. That would be my best guess. And as you rightly say, so there was a viral video that came out with this French speaking dude that basically talks about going into Gaza with his tanks and he wants to massacre all the Gazans, So it looks pretty bad, of course. And these are obviously people that have trainings. I mean, you can see the complexity of the tank. I think the video shows even the inside of the tank. There's a lot of electronics on board. These are not just like some kind of cowboys, although they act like one. These are people that have trained, that have received training in Israel, that are familiar with the equipment, and they are capable of, maneuvering tanks and going operational with it. So we can only assume that these are people that have been involved in previous military experience. If it's not for the IDF, at least for some NATO operations in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan.
And Ukraine as well. It's quite conceivable, isn't it? There's a rotation, right? Possibly.
Yes, there's rotation. Perhaps the money is better. There's many, mercenaries. At the end of the day, it's all about money. It's mainly about money. It's really about the offer, the equipment you're going to be working with, the conditions, and this is things that you negotiate. And these people have the ability and the network to do that. Now, this network exists in Belgium a lot. You have a lot of these networks as well in Italy. You get small network in France as well with various organizations which are actually considered terrorist organizations in the United States, but they operate on French soil legally, which are known to have paramilitaries on board as well. So, as I said, dual citizenship here seems to be the way forward as far as them being able to fight with different kind of flag, if you will, although it's illegal. And that's why I've always been promoting the cancellation of dual citizenship, because it creates too much conflict of interest and it challenges basically the law itself, So that's my problem. And as I say, we have pictures of many others. The tank was one of them, but there's many other pictures, trust me, and also Ukrainian as well, and other countries, Belgians. A lot of intelligence has been kind of gathered around these mercenaries and these paramilitary organizations and the networks that facilitate their coming into the Gaza border to allow them to take part into this fight, or I would say into this genocide.
Well, I think other people are saying the same thing, Freddie. This situation is deteriorating still in Gaza. We saw the incursions on the refugee camp Khan Yunis. That's in southern Gaza. So the Israelis are moving in on all areas of the Gaza Strip. So all of the narrative that we saw, was being said in the last couple of months, like, oh, we just want to, neutralize Hamas in the tunnels in the north, and then people need to leave their homes and go to the south. And then they go and bomb the south. So, and indeed targeting Palestinian people as they flee, targeting as they're in transit. So, I mean, this is just an unbelievable situation. We're seeing some of the worst casualties in the conflict, in the genocide in the last week. If you look at the day-to-day tally in terms of those killed, injured, and maimed, it's just unbelievable that they haven't been able to hit the brakes yet on this. And we don't see anybody coming forth, any European countries really, not in a strong manner, coming forth and just, doing something extreme to leverage, demand a ceasefire, grandstand at the European Parliament, or anything. The only country so far, Freddie, has been Yemen, actually. That's really stepped up and made a big statement. Isn't that strange, Freddie? The poorest country in the Middle East is the only one that has done anything to not just stand up to Israel, but the United States and all of its allies at the same time. It's pretty extraordinary, Freddie.
Yeah, they really kind of shocked everyone around the world. Their absolute 100% commitment to Palestine and to the Gaza cause and fighting basically the Zionist regime. In Israel seems to not be interested in giving any kind of peacetime for the civilians to be able to receive humanitarian aid. I think this is really where people are hurting. The people can understand to a certain extent the fight, the revenge, and the idea of taking out Hamas, if you will, whether it's military or politically speaking. But more and more, for those that have looked into this conflict and analyzed really the ultimate goal for the IDF and for the Israeli government and the war cabinet, which is basically to get rid of Hamas mainly and to free their hostages that are still in Gaza. Well, when you really analyze both of these goals, nothing shows clearly that what they're doing is going to eradicate after 100 days plus the Hamas. The Hamas seems to be well organized, well-equipped, prepared for this offensive and for the long run. And on the other side, I think the IDF operations have endangered tremendously the hostages. And we can see today the hostages' families are really taking it. We saw it a few days ago, going barging into a Knesset meeting and really telling them that that something needs to be done. This is really people are asking for elections as well to be organized earlier. There's so many things that is happening in Israel, and we only get a glimpse of it. I mean, a lot more probably is happening that we are not aware of. But the point that I was trying to make, Patrice, to close that chapter is that I think the ultimate goal from the Israeli war cabinet is actually to make Gaza uninhabitable. That is, for me, the only goal that is there on the map. And I think that's what the Houthis are really concerned about, as well as the Hezbollah, Iran, and anybody that is part of the acts of resistance, or even any European Westerners that are looking into this conflict and looking at it to say, this cannot be about Hamas. This is no longer about the hostage. I mean, Max Blumenthal, other, that have looked into this conflict for a very long time, so coming up now and many people are saying that, the Hannibal doctrine was not just on the 7th of October, but this is something that has been basically at every single corner of this military operation. And the hostages really are just casualties at this moment in time. They're just going to be sacrificed. Nothing shows anything different than the Hannibal doctrines in the way this military operation from the IDF has been conducted. So this is the destruction of the Strip, basically, make it uninhabitable, and making sure that at the end, the global community will have to be involved with the Palestinians, because if they have no home to go back to, if there's no Palestinian state that can be set, what's going to happen for the people? They've lost their home. They lost many of the members of their family. There's no more food. There's no more water. There's no more fuel coming into. There's hundreds of trucks waiting at the Rafah borders. And yet we're told that this is about Hamas. I think it's quite clear today. We can take that as a certainty that this war is really about ridding not only the Strip, but I think the occupied Palestinian territory of its Palestinians.
No, that's certainly what a lot of people are saying as well, Freddie. Very keen observations there about the situation, the increasingly deteriorating situation right now, the humanitarian situation, folks. Listen, the ramifications, the backlash of aid being kept from going into this area, medical supplies, hospitals being blown up, all of these things are going to culminate into some serious excess deaths. Okay, so those of you who followed the COVID and the vaccine mandate farragos and you were fixated on the statistic of excess deaths, well, you're going to see some excess deaths, unfortunately, in Gaza. So one hopes that those who are concerned with those lives will also be concerned with these lives as well. That's what we're asking. Freddie Ponton, I want to thank you for coming on to the program this week on TNT, Today's News Talk. As usual, your analysis and insights are most valued. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure, Patrick.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. And again, check out Freddie's archive up at 21stcenturywire.com. Get educated on the stories that he's following. We also have all his interviews archived on the website as well, so you can see all of Freddie's work over the last couple of years, and there's a lot there to go through. Look, right now, let's take a break with the network, and when we come back, we will try to connect our intrepid correspondent for some reactions on these. Also, breaking updates and his thoughts about the next hour's interview with our special guest, Miko Peled, is going to be joining us in the second hour. Basil Valentine, we'll connect with him in just a moment. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. This is TNT, Today's News Talk. We'll be right back.